Hey guys, Preconnotation Points here with another series wrap-up, this time with The Blending by Sharon Green. Right off the bat, I want to say that I didn't hate this series as much as I thought I would. I felt like there was a strong foundation of an interesting story in this series. However, right, you knew it was coming, that giant but. However, I felt like the overall plot was bogged down with a lot of unnecessary garbage, too many characters, too much tea drinking. The English want to know if there's such a thing as too much tea drinking, and yes, when the plot comes to a stop so that characters can drink tea, that is too much tea drinking. The basis of the story revolves around 5 strangers being forced into a competition to find out who will be this world's next royal blending. And the first 2 books in this series are basically just an introduction of the main characters as well as this world. Now, this is where I start to have problems with this series. I was really down for the idea of the plot with the first book, and when you first start reading a new series, you're kind of expecting for some time to be taken to establish both characters as well as the setting. Fine, everything checks out with book number 1. But then when we got to book number 2, it's just kind of more of the same, reestablishing in the minds of the readers that our 5 heroes are strong, but also reestablishing that the government is corrupt and evil, which got that from the first book, but thanks for wasting an entire book to establish this. In fact, the more I think about it, the second book was pretty much just a throwaway book, wasn't it? Anyway, in the third book, we finally move to the actual competitions, where our heroes learn to blend and go toe-to-toe against others. They're also fighting against the government and realizing exactly how corrupt that they are. And it's in this book that I think things became a little too real for our heroes. Bodies start to drop, brainwashing is brought up, like, a lot. And just when you start to think that things are going to go well for our heroes as they end up going against our other main characters, obviously they can't because there's 2 more books left. And I think that the third book left off on an interesting cliffhanger because I literally had no idea what was going to happen. The fourth book opened on everybody in dire straits having been drugged and basically sold into various types of slavery. They eventually managed to get out and go on to help everybody else. Most of the plot revolves around everybody rushing off to go save others of their group who had been sold into literal slavery, and they were being shipped off to go fight in a secret war. And I feel like it's after our 5 heroes are reunited that I felt like things went from they're powerful, but only because they work to get powerful, and the book amps it up to 12, and suddenly we're just stuck with these overpowered Mary Sues and Gary Stews. They brainwash people left, right, and center, and people die simply because their heroes thought at them for 2 seconds. The series comes to a close with our heroes naturally overthrowing the tyrant government, making nice with the opposing army, and helping the lower class to throw off the oppressive shackles of the upper class. And there are a few things that I want to dive into deeper. I have a lot that I want to say, so I'm going to organize it by category and then go from there. Characters. Actually, I'm not sure how anybody's names are supposed to be pronounced in this. I'm going off of how I've been pronouncing them, or not pronouncing them, as most characters were randomly renamed. Jovi. Actually, I don't have anything bad to say about Jovi. I just wanted to give a shout out to the author for including a character with a background like Jovi's and not turning it into something skeezy and gross. I thought that her relationship with Lauren felt sweet and genuine and not at all forced and awkward. Unlike the Tamarissa and Valiant relationship, I enjoyed the idea that Lauren was a little taken aback by Jovi's history and how he wanted to save her from something that he had always thought was dirty. However, they actually had open and honest communication between them, and they were able to come to an understanding about Lauren's upbringing versus Jovi's background, which was also really nice. And you know what? It was honestly refreshing, especially in comparison to a lot of the other junk I read, where runs on miscommunication is literally the only plot point. Rian. I also found it pretty refreshing how he started off with this spoiled man-child who barely seemed able to dress himself, and then over the course of the 5 books, he matured into a functioning adult. I thought that the idea of having his mother being this Mother Gothel figure who was literally gaslighting him and manipulating him to her own end was an interesting twist. I kind of wish that there had been some more closure between Rian and his mother at the end. I literally went back through just now to reread the scene in the palace between Jovi, Selena, and Rian's mom, and I don't think that she was killed, but Jovi never actually said anything about the mom do anything in particular, like stay away from Rian or you'll regret it. but at the same time, half the point of the other country coming in to take all the members of the upper class away to become their slaves is this entire, you are a terrible person and this is karma. So at the same time, maybe it's for the best that Rian never got the final say with the woman who raised him. Naran. It's not so much that I dislike Naran's character, it's more of this general confusion, because when she was first introduced, she was literally just a woman who was selling her body, and that's fine. Everybody in this book are all adults and they can do whatever they like. So I was really confused when Rian just kind of became obsessed with her. After our heroes blended, and then they did their first bout of being overpowered and questioned Naran and where her loyalties lay, she just kind of became the unofficial sixth member of the group, and that was fine, I guess. In comparison to characters like Tamaris and Valiant, she was way less annoying anyway, so I kind of didn't mind her. Now, in the final book, she revealed that she actually did have a power, but it wasn't one of the 5 elements. Instead, there was actually a 6th power of prophecy. And then when she spelled it out for everybody, suddenly her presence began to make a lot more sense. However, you need to slog through literally most of the series before we got to this, which I felt was kind of frustrating. And when Naran's power of prophecy was first introduced, I was really into it, especially because the others realized that she could blend with them and that they could see the stuff that she could see. But like everything in relation to blending, her powers quickly turned into this overpowered Mary Sue thing, and it got old pretty quick. I still have a few things to say about the other seers, but that'll be for another category. Valiant and Tamarissa, because it would be hard for me not to talk about one without talking about the other, since their stories are so tied together. So, when the series first started, I was really on board with the idea of Tama's character, mainly because I grew to appreciate Jovi so much, and at first Tama was a fairly sympathetic character. Her parents had literally sold her in exchange for a business deal, and granted she never really went into that great of detail about what happened in her relationship to her first husband, but you kind of pick up on subtext that she was abused by him, probably in multiple ways. And it does make for an interesting start to a romantic subplot. She was so badly hurt, and then here's a man who's willing to help her tear down those walls because he does have feelings for her. And for the first 3 books, there was pretty much this constant push and pull between Tam and Valen, the constant will they, won't they. And then we get around to Valen's imprisonment in the 4th book and things that happen to him, and it's just, the entire thing was just so horrible. Valiant was drugged and abused by Elektra, and yet Tama can't see past her own nose to even begin to understand what happened to him, which I find insanely frustrating because Tama herself went through a similar situation, not only at the start of the 4th book, but also in an abusive situation with her own husband. And I think that I would have been fine if that was the end of that Tama refusing to acknowledge the fact that Val hadn't been handcuffed to a bed and drugged out of his mind is not consensual would have naturally ended their relationship. But it wasn't. Val continued to pine after her, and I get that it's hard to turn your feelings off like that, but I think that how do you look at something so terrible that happened to you and then look at somebody who thinks that you wanted it to happen and you still tell yourself, this is a person that I still want in my life? When Tama picks up a second love interest in Allison, Val still continues to fight for Tama's affections. Even when Tama is just unnecessarily cruel towards Val, he's still madly in love with her. I know that love is supposed to be logical, but at this point, this is just sheer insanity without any basis in logic or the real world. And then, because none of that was enough, the 2 of them patched things up in time for this series to end. I mean, nobody had their and they lived happily ever after moment, not even Jovi and Lauren. But at the same time, it kind of felt like the Tama-Val kiss and makeup situation at the end was just kind of shoved in there, if only for that happily ever after. The seated blending. Overall, I think that it was a bold decision to include the point of view of some of the antagonists. When these 5 were first introduced, it was kind of unclear what's going on. The entire thing was caught up in the muddle of the 2nd book. And as I said earlier, a lot of the stuff from that 2nd book was just unnecessary and should have been completely cut. Even in the 3rd book, even as one of the characters goes out and murders like 3 people, it's still kind of unclear what kind of role that these 5 are going to be playing in the long run. Mainly because while things that they're doing are kind of terrible, at the same time they're hitting all of the notes about wanting to overthrow the current government, whom they view as being weak and terrible. So it's honestly kind of difficult to hate them when their views were largely echoing my own as far as that goes. But as the reader learned exactly what they did at the end of the 3rd book, and as the 5 of them came into power, it became obvious fairly quickly that while they were eager to sit around and talk the talk, they were just going to sit by and continue to feed into the same system that allowed people like them to come into power in the first place. And I still have a lot that I want to say about them, but I think that the rest of the conversation should probably be rolled into the category of the government, so put a pin in this for now. Also, I can't get over how quickly that they changed their minds about everything, especially the one who was going around and just murdering people, and it went from, okay, here's some new characters, to practically an all-out killing spree of people who were mean to him in such a short amount of time. Overall, I can't say that I'm surprised that these characters met the ending that they did, mainly because they were so busy trying to clean up messes that they had literally just made. Of course, they had no time to actually focus on the actual problems of stopping the main characters. And as I said so in my daily snark, but simple things like finding those hostages to hold over their heads. 4 out of the 5 were so wrong, it was almost laughable. And even then, they were more concerned about stuff like finding more warm bodies to chuck at the main characters than stuff going on in the city. So when it came down to it, our heroes were able to just walk casually back into the capital. And I get that they're the bad guys and everything, but at the same time, any idiot could have told you not to do that stuff. And because it's going to bug me if I don't talk about it, the endless parade of random side characters whose names were ridiculous and their roles pointless. Actually, that's kind of everything that I wanted to say. No, wait, I wanted to talk about the really random guy from the 4th and 5th books, the one who was stabbed and then pretended to be suicidal just so that he could play the seated blending. Yeah, that guy. Like, everybody outside of the main 5 characters, Naran, Alsen, and the seating blending were unnecessary to the plot. But, like, this guy had multiple point of view chapters, and he was trying to assassinate or to at least control the seated blending. But in the end, he just kind of ran off, and we literally never even got closure on what happened to him. Like, they mentioned going out to round up all of the upper class just to dish out justice, but at the same time, the book went out of its way to include the guy in multiple chapters. We got closure in Elektra, but not that guy. Government. I think that my biggest problem with this series is just there's this underlying theme pretty much as soon as the central plot is established. And that is whenever somebody fails at one of the tests, that they just kind of disappear. That there were probably hundreds of people who went to the Capitol for the mandatory testing, and the people like Hat who were just kind of washed up because they were middles. And up until about halfway through the 4th book, I just kind of assumed that they were being murdered. A government-mandated survival of the fittest, where if you're not fit, then we're going to literally kill you, I guess. But halfway through the 4th book, we discover that no, these people are being shipped off to this secret war, which is another topic that I need to touch upon, but I'm not done ranting about this just yet. So, like, hundreds of people are apparently going missing every single year, and literally not one single person says anything about any of this. I mean, half of the point of the series is that people who do speak up get murdered. There was an entire section with the hidden farmhouse full of dead bodies that spoke volumes about what happens to people who speak up and try to do their own thing. But at the same time, I don't know, if half of my village suddenly vanished, even without saying anything, we'd all be thinking it. And the fact that not a single person was like, yeah, the government just makes people disappear, but there's not much that we can do if we want to keep living. It's just super unrealistic because people are bound to notice. And coming back around to that war, like, how in the world did they manage to hide that? Especially considering that there were villages nearby who were probably deeply impacted. As the battlefront is pushed back and then regains ground, there would have been people who saw it, people who would have heard things. And I get that they're sending these people to the front lines and have zero plans for the soldiers to literally come back alive. But still, how? And finally, the prophecy. I feel like the entire thing was this giant build-up to this, especially since the last book was literally titled Prophecy. And up until the very last chapter, I was really on board with it. Yes, there was a prophecy, but the fact that the main characters didn't take it seriously was honestly kind of refreshing. Like, it was mentioned right off the bat in the first book, and then never brought up again until the main characters talked to the guild members in the last book. I keep thinking about all those books that have the prophecy and the guy does the thing in order to stop the prophecy and that ends up just making the prophecy come true, and it's just such a tired trope and I'm honestly kind of sick of it. So I was thinking about it and I was kind of like, this is nice. More books should do this. However, in that last chapter, the guy sits down with them and he's like, so yeah, there was no actual prophecy. It was just words of advice, which nobody listened to, and everything that the prophets said was going to happen. Surprise! It happened! Which I thought was actually kind of funny, honestly. But then I'm just kind of left scratching my head over why it's called prophecy if the prophecy wasn't important and then literally didn't even exist. So yeah, that's the blending series. I didn't hate it. I thought that it had some really nice bits, but it felt overly drawn out for no real reason. If anything, I think that this entire series could have been cut down to a trilogy and that it could have wrapped things up nicely. However, this book is older, from the 90s. It's not that I have anything against older published books or anything, but I just kept thinking that if Green had tried to publish this book in today's market, they would have probably pressured her to label it as a young adult series, which... Yeah, I got to the first scene with the boys partying at the bar and the introduction of Naran's character, and I'm like, wow, okay, I thought that this was a young adult, but it's, not. And, oh shoot, you guys, I just found out that Green wrote 3 books as a sequel to this series. I'm going to try and find them and squeeze them in somewhere in my Patreon lineup. The next video of the Betrothed will be posted on Monday as usual, so I'll see you on Monday.